My name is Sophia, and I am 27 years old. For most of my life, I believed that the hardest thing a person could survive was losing someone they loved. I was wrong. Sometimes the hardest thing is discovering that the people standing closest to you were never really standing beside you at all. For 3 years, I had been married to a man named Daniel Carter. To everyone who knew us, Daniel and I were the perfect couple. We lived in a beautiful house outside Chicago, attended expensive charity events, traveled whenever we could, and appeared to have the kind of marriage people secretly envied. But behind our front door, my life was completely different. Daniel's mother, Victoria Carter, had made it clear from the day I married her son that she considered me an outsider. Victoria was the kind of woman who could smile warmly while destroying someone's life with a single phone call. She was elegant, wealthy, extremely intelligent, and frighteningly controlling. But I never imagined that her influence reached far beyond our family. My father, Richard Bennett, owned a successful manufacturing company called Bennett Industrial Solutions. It wasn't a giant corporation, but it had been built from nothing. My father started the business in a small rented warehouse when I was a child. Over the years, it grew into a respected company with hundreds of employees and clients across several states. My father had always been proud of one thing above everything else. He had built his company honestly. He trusted his employees. He knew their families. He knew who worked hard and who didn't. And most importantly, he believed that loyalty could not be bought. That belief almost destroyed him. The first strange thing happened about 8 months after my wedding. My father called me late one evening. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I was on the living room sofa in Daniel's house, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Daniel was upstairs, supposedly working on his laptop. Victoria had visited earlier that afternoon, and as usual, she had spent most of the evening criticizing everything, from the food I served to the way I decorated our house. My phone rang. It was Dad. I smiled when I answered. "Hey, Dad, what's going on?" His voice sounded different, tired. "Are you alone, Sophia?" I immediately sat up. "Yes, why?" There was a pause. Then he said something that I didn't understand. "I think someone is trying to take control of my company." I laughed nervously. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "I'm serious." My smile disappeared. He explained that over the previous few months, several employees had begun making unusual decisions without his approval. Some managers were suddenly challenging his instructions. Certain financial reports were arriving late. A few employees who had worked for him for years had become strangely secretive. At first, Dad thought it was normal workplace tension. Then he noticed something else. New employees were appearing in important departments. People he had never personally interviewed. The truth began to unravel 3 weeks later. But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand something about my marriage to Daniel. For the first 2 years, I genuinely believed he loved me. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't staying for money. And I wasn't trying to become part of his wealthy family. I loved him. That was what made everything that happened afterward so painful. Daniel and I had met at a charity fundraiser when I was 23. My best friend had convinced me to attend, even though I hated those kinds of events. I remember standing near the dessert table, trying to look busy while secretly checking my phone, when Daniel approached me. He didn't act like the other wealthy men in the room. At least, that's what I thought. He asked me why I looked bored. I told him because everyone was pretending to enjoy themselves. He laughed. That was how it started. For months, Daniel made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He remembered tiny details. My favorite coffee, the books I liked, the songs I listened to when I was sad. When my father had a health scare, Daniel was there. When my mother needed help after surgery, Daniel drove me to the hospital. He made me believe that his family didn't matter, that we were separate from them, that our marriage was ours. I was wrong. Because after we got married, I slowly realized that Victoria had been watching me from the beginning. She knew everything. Where I worked, who my friends were, how much money I made, what my father owned, what my father planned to do with his company. At first, I thought she was simply being nosy. I didn't understand that she was collecting information. Information she would eventually use against. For the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 completely different lives. In front of Daniel and Victoria, I was the same Sophia they had always known. Quiet, polite, patient. The woman who avoided arguments. The woman who smiled at family dinners even when Victoria insulted her. The woman who never questioned where Daniel went or who he was talking to. But behind their backs, I was becoming something completely different. I was investigating my own marriage. And the more I discovered, the more I realized that the truth was far worse than I had imagined. My father and Marcus continued their investigation without telling anyone. I became the person they used to communicate with Daniel's movements. Not because I wanted to spy on my husband, because I needed to know the truth. I started paying attention to everything. The calls he received, the meetings he attended, the people he suddenly started seeing. And most importantly, the changes in his behavior whenever my father's company was mentioned. I discovered that Daniel had become extremely careful. He stopped leaving documents around. He changed passwords. He started keeping his phone with him at all times. But there was one thing he couldn't hide: his schedule. I noticed that every Thursday afternoon, Daniel left our house around 3 o'clock. He always told me he was going to his mother's office. At first, I believed him. Then Marcus checked. Daniel wasn't going to Victoria's office. He was going somewhere else. A private business club downtown. A place where members could meet with outsiders knowing who they were seeing. The first time I heard about it, I thought Marcus was mistaken. But then I saw it myself. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel told me he had to meet his mother. I smiled. Of course. He kissed me. I'll be home by dinner.
I didn't send the email that night. I stared at the screen for almost 20 minutes before finally closing my laptop. Something about contacting Daniel's father felt dangerous. Not because I was afraid of him, because I didn't know what he knew. His name was Charles Carter. He had been married to Victoria for nearly 25 years before their divorce. According to everything I had heard from Daniel, the divorce had been ugly. Very ugly. Charles had left the family business years earlier and moved to another state. Daniel rarely spoke about him. Victoria never spoke about him. And whenever someone mentioned his name, the conversation immediately changed. But there was something I had recently discovered. Charles had never completely disappeared from the Carter family's business affairs. He still owned a minority interest in Carter Strategic Advisory. And if the documents Marcus had found were correct, his ownership gave him the right to request a full financial audit. That was exactly what I needed. But first, I had to know whether he would help me. The next morning, I told Rebecca everything. She listened carefully. Do you know where Charles lives? Yes. Have you spoken to him before? No. Does Daniel know you're considering contacting him? No. Good. I looked at her. Why? Because if Victoria finds out, she may try to stop you. How? Legally, financially, personally. I frowned. She can't stop me from contacting her ex-husband. She doesn't have to stop you. Rebecca leaned forward. She only has to convince him not to believe you. That made sense. I had to be careful. I needed evidence before I contacted Charles. So I called Marcus. I need everything you have on Carter Strategic Advisory. Everything? Everything. He paused. That could take time. We have 10 days. I know. And I need something else. What? Find out what happened between Victoria and Charles. Marcus was silent. Why? Because I think Charles may know something. About Victoria? About the company. Marcus agreed. 3 hours.
The phone rang at 6:12 on a Tuesday morning. I was still half asleep when I answered it. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Then I heard my father's voice. Sophia. I immediately sat up. Dad? What's wrong? His breathing was uneven. "Where are you?"
"At home. Why?"
"Don't come here." I felt a cold wave move through my body.
"What happened?"
Another pause. Then he said, "They arrested me." I couldn't speak.
"What?"
"Listen to me carefully."
"Dad, what are you talking about?"
"They're accusing me of financial fraud." My heart stopped.
"That's impossible."
"I know."
"Where are you?"
"I'm at the police station."
"Who did this?"
My father didn't answer.
"Dad!"
"I'll call you later." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. For several seconds, I couldn't. The photograph stayed in my hand for almost a full minute. I couldn't look away. The woman standing behind Victoria and Martin Blake was young, maybe 25 or 26 years old. She had dark hair, a serious expression, and a small silver necklace around her neck. The same necklace. I had seen it before. Not on her. On another photograph. A photograph of Daniel. It was from years ago. Before I knew him. Before our first date. Before our wedding. I looked at the back of
Victoria's face went completely white. For several seconds, nobody in the boardroom moved. I kept my hands on the table. The folder remained between us. The same folder that contained the evidence Victoria had spent years trying to bury. The same evidence she had used to control Charles. The same evidence she had used to control Daniel. And now it was sitting in front of her. In front of the entire board. Victoria slowly looked at Martin Blake. Martin looked back at her. Neither of them spoke. I smiled. "Something wrong?" Victoria finally found her voice. "What is that?" I leaned back. "You know exactly what it is." "No, I don't." "Then let's find out together." I opened the folder. The first document was a financial transaction. The second was a company transfer. The third was an email. The fourth was a signed agreement. And then I placed a photograph on the table. Victoria looked at it. Her eyes widened. It was a photograph of her and Martin, standing outside the office of a company they had acquired 15 years earlier. Behind them was a man I didn't recognize. Charles had told me his name. Edward Lawson, the former owner. The man who had claimed Victoria had manipulated him into selling his company. Victoria stared at the photograph. "Where did you get this?" "From Charles." Her eyes narrowed. "Charles?" "Yes. He has no right to have those documents." I smiled. "That's interesting. Why?" "Because according to the documents, Charles was one of the—" I walked out of the boardroom without looking back. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't walking beside Daniel. I wasn't holding his hand. I wasn't trying to understand his silence. I wasn't defending him. And I wasn't protecting his family. I was walking away. My wedding ring felt heavy in my pocket. I had removed it only minutes earlier, but it felt like I had been carrying the weight of that marriage for years. Outside the building, I stopped on the sidewalk. Chicago was cold that morning. The wind cut through my coat. Cars moved past me. People walked around me. The world continued as if nothing had happened. But my world had changed completely. My phone rang. Rebecca. I answered. "Hello?" "Sophia, where are you?" "Outside." "Are you okay?" I looked back at the company building. No. Then I took